Welcome to the Getting the Deal Done podcast. I am John Martinka, and today I am very pleased to have Doug Gray with Action Learning. Doug is a leadership coach and a whole lot more based in Nashville, Tennessee. And we're going to talk about things that he does for leaders, for family business owners, and family members, and including some pretty interesting stuff that we talked about a month ago about using AI in this field. So, welcome, Doug.
Thanks very much, John. Glad to be here.
Let's start out with a very short synopsis of how you got from where you were to action learning and the leadership coaching and AI and all of that.
Well, I've always focused on leadership development. I was a teacher for 9 years, and an outward bound instructor for a bunch of seasons. And I love the notion that we can create little worlds, like on an expedition, that somehow facilitate growth and learning. Next gens are more curious and better educated than old people like us sometimes with silver hair. And I like working with people who are curious and ambitious. So, anyways, I've always focused on leadership development. As far as action learning goes, in '97 or so, we were living in DC, and I was doing a project with a couple of really smart folks who were professors, one at Georgetown, one at Hopkins. And they said, Doug, you're an executive coach. And I said, really? What's that? And ever since, I've been trying to answer that question. So I've always focused on coaching and leading other folks. The clients have changed, as things do, from smaller businesses to Fortune 100s. In the last decade, I've focused mostly on family-owned business leaders, particularly next gens who might be in their 30s or 50s. And sometimes they have an expectation that they'll take over a business or an asset, or there'll be some wealth transfer. But the owners may or may not be as committed to that wealth transfer. You probably know some of those statistics. You probably know some of those stories.
Yeah, in fact, I'm going to give you a real quick one. What you just said brought this back in my memory. My CPA at the time, good friend of mine, also referred me to one of his clients, and I sit down for a cup of coffee with the guy, and he starts talking. He says, "How old do you think I am?" And that's a leading question, right? And he says, "Well, I'm 87," and he's still working, running his little company, sales distribution company. And as we talk, he starts telling me about his son, and his son is, I think at the time was like a year away from 50, and was his chief salesperson, brought in more business than anyone else. And the line that I got was, "I don't think he's mature enough to run the company."
That's right. And you had trouble probably keeping a straight face because you knew in your gut he was more than mature enough.
So I understand what you're dealing with. That how do I let go? And I was at a trade association professional group meeting yesterday, and the speaker was a second generation, and her dad was there, and it's nice when it works. It was a great handoff.
And most are, let's be clear. Most transitions are quiet events with a couple of advisors, maybe an attorney who handles the estate and a financial or wealth advisor who handles the financial matters. Most are not like the HBO series. They're not like, Succession or
Yeah,
Landman or even King Lear. They're not nasty necessarily. But that doesn't make for good television or sensational press. So of course that's not what we see in the media.
yeah, of course.
You're right. They're mostly quiet events. It's when
So
they're not easy that I get called in to help provide some expertise with the process of
okay, so
succession.
I'm looking at your website, and I love this line, the heading right on top. Business is good, but could it be amazing? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about some of the things you would do to help business be amazing for people who think, hey, we're doing pretty good. And but how do you know you could be doing better, right?
Yeah, it's that old cartoon image of looking over the fence and not looking far enough down the horizon. I think when we think about being amazing, in psychology, people talk about flourishing behaviors. Psychology used to focus on the negative stuff. How do I manage anxiety? How do I manage depression? How do I manage violence? And we needed that research, especially after the world wars. But now, of course, we look at how do we flourish? And the younger students and people you may know are better at this. They're better educated. They're more intentional about what they learn and uh, what they choose to read and how they choose to process information. Some of them choose optimism. Well, if we choose an amazing outcome, if we choose an optimistic future, that implies that we want to flourish, that we're not satisfied with the status quo. And you know, John, that's an ancient dilemma. The older ones want to protect their assets, and the younger ones want to show their capacity and take on responsibilities. It doesn't matter if they're in their 50s or in their 20s. They still want to show that they can add value to the business or the enterprise.
With a couple little nuances, you sound like me when I talk about the owner who is they're making really good money and they're coasting. They don't want to take the risk of more employees, more machines, etc. And the employees, the younger ones, want career advancement.
Yep.
And
Well, to be clear, they'll get faster career advancement in a family-owned business because it's closely held. They'll probably stay there longer. They'll have better health. They'll have better benefits than a publicly traded company. That's a common fact. And one of the things that we don't always think about is the impact of family-owned businesses, which are 65% of job growth, 60 to 70% of our economy, our GDP,
hmm
and 30% of the Fortune 500. So we tend to think of them as the mom and pops. Who's my mechanic or dentist or
yeah,
veterinarian? But that's not accurate in every culture.
yeah. There are a lot of well, I think the SBA still considers small business up to 500 employees, and the you get up that high, you're really not a small business. But okay. So the other thing on your website, and I know we're digressing a little from what we talked about before, is uh, ad fit.
Hmm.
So tell the audience about ad fit, AD-FIT, which you've trademarked.
I did, in part because I've met a lot, you probably have too. I've met a lot of people who say, I'm an executive coach, I'm a business coach, I'm a leadership coach. Well, so what? What does it mean? It used to mean that there's gaps in Doug's performance behavior, and Doug's down here, and Doug needs to be up here. So the coach is going to bring you up to that threshold. And it's basically based on an incompetence measure, a measure of static stuff that really ought to define your success. Well, that's not what coaching is. That's what management is. And coaching in my world needs to assume that business can be amazing and that people can flourish. Well, how do we flourish individually and collectively? And that's why I developed this. So the A and the D are what you and I might do, or you and a client might do over time. And that stands for how do we assess your strengths? There's lots of validated assessments for that process. And then the D is define a meaningful outcome. If you're working with somebody whose outcome is to leave the company, that says something very different than somebody whose outcome is to stay there and contribute for generational wealth to something bigger than themselves. Very different outcomes. And the implication of the A and the D is the client's agenda is more important than my agenda as the coach or as the consultant. Too often it's top down. One thing we've learned from millennials and Gen Zs is that they have agency. They want to express their outcomes. They want to express their voices. John, our girls are 29 and 30. We taught them to do so. And they're very expressive, thankfully. And that's where innovation comes from. So the A and the D are essential over time. And then there's a little hyphen because every time I have a session with them, I'll ask, what do you want to focus on today? Which is the F. That's the opening concern or question. The I is, have you considered this intervention or interaction? Psychologists talk about interventions, which is a little bit academic and nerdy, but interactions are really what we try. And then the T is, what are you taking away from the session that you want to do next? Well, I've done that for decades. It presumes that people can flourish rather than people can skill up to some pre-designed competency measure. And it also presumes that we can use technology to track that growth. As an example, for the last, I don't know, 6 to 8 months, I've used with clients AI summaries. Just as this session is being recorded, I suppose, you could click an AI summary after a Zoom session with certain clients, and it comes back to the host. And the host can then edit it, take those notes, and if they wish, share them with the client. I have clients now in their 30s and 40s who look forward to that as much as the sessions. And the reason is they do their work between the sessions. So now we've got better articulated summaries of what they think is important, the A and the D. They're assessing their strengths and defining their outcomes. It's an example of how much more effective consulting and coaching can be when we use smart AI tools.
Yeah, it's really something to see those, and especially for someone like me who has a hard time reading his own writing when taking notes on a call and scribbling.
We're related. We must be brothers. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, because it does come down to the simple things and the takeaways and things to work on. And I've worked with owners and same thing. What do you want to get done? Okay, break it into small pieces and attack it. And
Yeah.
yeah,
It's a
get
great question that I don't think we use enough. What are you taking away from this call that you might do next?
it.
Because what it forces the client to do, in my example, is summarize what they think is important. My last call. If she didn't say some of the things I thought I heard her say, but I think they're important, that's an opportunity for me to remind her. You also said this, and don't you want to add that to your list? Oh yeah, she'll write it down.
Yeah.
And the work belongs to her, not me. The old notion is that consultants do all the work, coaches do all the work. The reality is that's silly. The reality is clients need to do the work because they're the ones who are learning and they're practicing new behaviors. I like that fact. It's weird to me that attorneys get to practice law. It's weird that doctors get to practice medicine, but you and I, we don't get to practice leadership. Well, why not?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's good. And it is true. And when I've used a coach, uh, and they say, "What do you want to get done?" and and let's get then I have things that I need to work on, and it's helped articulate, give me strategies, and go implement them and do the same thing with the clients that we work with. We're not going to bring, we're not the silver platter to do everything. You have to be involved with what's going on. So uh let's pivot here. Popular words in the last 5 years: shift, AI. You're using AI. I would think from other people I've talked to that do anything in coaching, leadership, you know, people I know from across town have talked to across country. AI rarely comes up, if ever. Maybe I think you're the first one who said you use the AI in any kind of coaching. So
Well, I've been
talk about
using,
what you do and the benefits that your clients get.
sure, I already gave you one example, and that's the AI summaries that might be
Yeah.
useful to accelerate somebody's agenda. I'll give you two others. So the second example is a closed language learning model, a closed LLM or a small LLM. The analogy would be instead of using a large language model like OpenAI, imagine you go to your local bookstore and you select 100 books that you like, or then you go to your private bookstore and you select 100 books that you like. And imagine that you just upload those 100 books into, say they're in a digital form, into something called John's Library. I have one I call Gray Matters because people tease me and have for a long time about that. Well, it's a customized LLM. It's a small LLM. So you can push a button and not share your content with the external world. You will not share it with OpenAI and it will not take your content, which makes it a private digital wall, right? It's the reason you go to that law firm versus a different law firm. It's the reason you go to a law firm rather than LegalZoom or something that's broad and has access to suspect protocols that may or may not be legal in California or North Carolina or Tennessee. Uh, when I think about a small language model like that, this is a distinct advantage for professional service firms. As an example, a few weeks ago, I gave a talk to the Attorneys for Family Held Enterprises, AFI.com. Bunch of good people who I thought were going to be very resistant because they're attorneys. And attorneys are resistant to change and they're pessimistic by nature, right? They protect our assets, thankfully. Well, when I shared some of the trends and did a demo with them of one of my tools, an AI assisted coaching tool, they were delighted. They were able to see immediately how AI could assist them in their business. And I did a thing I've never done before, but I reached out because I knew some of the members to two of them, board members, and sent them an email that morning before my talk. And the email was an AI query to look at their business strengths and weaknesses, competitive advantages, and local competitors who might be a threat to their business. And I did a couple quick prompts. A prompt is just a question that you use, and they have to be articulated in certain ways so the prompt gets the information you want. You can do it again and again until you get the information you want. And I sent these to the two people I just mentioned. And in the session, with about 100 people in the room, I said, okay, you received an email this morning. If you haven't opened it up, you've got a few minutes, do so now. And I want to know, how accurate is this? And one guy from New York jumps up. He says, oh, my word. I never knew these guys were around the corner 5 miles away, and they're a massive competitor. So he instantly competitive advantages, right? He learned from the AI. But my question was, how accurate is this? Because I didn't want it to um, distribute anything that was inaccurate. And he was blown away, as was the second guy. Now, small sample size
Yeah.
may not be representative, but I think you and I and everybody who's listening to this can instantly create a small model, a closed LLM, instantly. And if people have questions about that, they can go to YouTube or they can use me or they can go to an AI and ask it for the 6 steps to do. It's not hard. And I use it now with all my clients. So I send them a link. Here's chat GPT dot whatever, gray matters is part of the name, right? And they click on it and they see a prompt that references my books and dissertation and research. And it's creepy because it sounds a little bit like me, the first response. And then, of course, they'll use it again and again and dig deeper and deeper. And the more you use it, I've trained mine to only use peer-reviewed, validated sources. An example would be Google Scholar, because I don't want it to take stuff from, say, Facebook or some social media platform filled with histrionics and outrage. Instead, I want it to be academically based. And I think that's a smart use. I think that's something that any of your listeners can do immediately. Does that make sense?
Uh, it makes sense. I mean, obviously the devil's in the details, and that's how you get it done right. So, what if I'm hearing you right? If I've written 5 books, if I would upload them into a closed language model, it would the AI would be able to draw things from those books.
Exactly right. John, you probably got 100 transcripts from these recordings over time. That's digital data. Your YouTube recordings is digital data. You can push a button, download that digital data. That data can be populated into your private language model this afternoon.
That's fascinating. I'm taking notes.
Yeah, I see that. So that's example number two. Example number one was using AI to accelerate a client's agenda by having a summary of some sort. Example number two is using a closed language model, some small-ish automation tool. And it's frankly, it's very easy to do. And I would also add, keep it for internal use only. So this is not client facing. This is John learning about whatever topic, or John's clients learning about whatever topic, but it's internal only. And the third example is a real gap in the coaching consulting world, and that is we don't use AI enough for personal leadership development. If I ask our kids who are 29 and 30, so they're responsible adults in corporate careers, what they turn to for information, it's a digital tool of some sort, right? And there are 100 examples of what they favor, and everybody's got their own list. Well, you could probably, you probably know this, Copilot, Microsoft has used Copilot and various tools for 20 years, and they've just been released to the world in the last few years. My next door neighbor runs some of that work for Microsoft. Google, same story. They've been using these tools for decades in Google X and internally, and now they're available. In fact, you know that the number one search engine is Google. Number two is owned by Google, and that's YouTube. How do
Mhm.
I, whatever. Well, now if you go to Google, the search is displaced by Gemini, which they also own, the AI tool, which will aggregate answers for you before you finish your search item. How do I dot, dot, dot? And it already populates with what it thinks you might fill in. Well, that's an example of AI displacing search engines, which is going to affect everything in marketing. It already has, according to some experts in that world. I'm not an expert in that world. And it's going to accelerate the learning for individual leaders. Let me explain that a little. Do you have a question or a comment on what I just said?
No, I'm following it very closely.
Okay. Uh, I think that AI assisted leadership development is not only here to stay, but it's here to accelerate our learning. If I can access an AI with an IQ of 200, or if I can access 20 of them with IQs of 200 to 2000, why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I ask them for feedback? So, as an example, I've got an AI assisted coaching tool that I launched in January with a guy. We've all got a guy, right? And my guy is a retired learning and development guy from Fortune 50 companies. And that information's at JIT Coach, justintimecoach.com. So jitcoach.com. You can go there.
What is that URL again? I'll put it in the notes. Just
JIT stands for just in time coach. So jitcoach.com.
okay.
It's also at linked at the nextgenpeergroups.com site. So it's an AI assisted coaching tool is listed there in
Okay.
resources. But the bottom line is imagine that a client of yours who's having difficulty expressing what they need to express, sibling conflicts, succession concerns. How do I manage somebody who's blunt, rude? How do I manage a next gen, let's say Gen Z, who comes from a different ethnicity, is has very low social skills and needs to develop empathy? I'm making all this up. Well, let's imagine that person goes online to a platform like mine and selects a role play. There are 20 different role plays, like I just mentioned. They pick one, sibling rivalry, and then they pick an avatar that could be friendly or blunt or skeptical or whatever. And then they push a button. So now they'll interact with that avatar in that role play, and there's a rubric that scores them in whatever ways are useful. And there's lots of ways to customize this. So it could be done for attorneys, back to that example. It could be done for innovative entrepreneurs. It could be done for manufacturing leaders in a small shop. The point is that after a 2 or 3 minute recording, which is on the client's screen, it's totally secure because it's only on their screen. I can't see it. I can see if they've done it, but I can't see any details. And then you push another button and it'll provide analysis and feedback and coaching recommendations. So the analysis and feedback is based on what we're doing now. So the recording of that person looks at their voice and digital and everything from eye contact to questions and pauses, all the rhetorical skills that you and I know are important to build relationships. And it'll give you a bunch of data based on those things. But the more important data, I think, is the coaching data. So let's say it says, Doug, you're dealing with this blunt avatar uh, on sibling conflict. And frankly, you were not as patient as you could have been. You didn't establish rapport. You didn't listen well. You cut him or her off, whatever the feedback is. And it'll score me. So if my score is a 3 out of 10 or whatever it is, it will say, here's your aggregated score and all these submeasures. Here's based on the rubric. And then there's a little button you can push. You could share it with your manager if you're really daring or foolish. You can share it with your coach, same criteria if you're daring and trusting. Or you could push the button and do it again. So now we're practicing the same role play for another 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. What we're really doing is looking at speed to competence. How does Doug demonstrate empathy over time? The psychologists can measure these things. Data analysts can measure these things. But individual clients have never had a tool to accelerate those tools and resources until now. And I think it'll be incredibly transformative for leaders in two ways. One is privately, because they'll develop the skills and confidence to improve how they communicate. And the second is publicly. We'll reduce conflicts. The number one complaint of family-owned business leaders is they tolerate the conflict in the hallway between two owners or longtime members of that business. And you've probably seen this. You referenced a manufacturing shop a minute ago, as if it's normal. Well, it's not necessarily normal. And it could be a coachable skill that can be coached out of that team or that business. I'm excited about it. We'll
Yeah.
see if people adopt it. We'll see if they use it.
Okay. Well, Doug, our time has flown by. I've got a couple more things. I wanted to talk to you about your three. You had mentioned in our prior call through a 360 for especially for family businesses. Now, most people, I'm sure, listening to this know what a 360 is, which is often done on a CEO or sales manager or something. Talk about your 360 for family business.
They have been done, and that's in part because psychologists know it's the most valid form of feedback for those leaders. It's typically managers and directors and above. And they've been done poorly, in my view, unethically. An example would be if you're at a large company, I won't drop names, the VP of HR would have access to that information. But Doug, as a 20 or 30-year-old aspiring manager, does not own it. And it's often pulled out because I've worked with these leaders. It's pulled out 20 years later, 10 years later, and they'll say, Doug, you've got low empathy. Well, BS. 20 years ago, I was working on it maybe, and I was lower then, but I've been working on it for 20 years. So it is a career killer that's commonly owned by the employer. And that's the unethical part. We believe, I developed this with a partner at Pepperdine, Kent Rhodes, who's brilliant. We believe that that data should be in the hands of the owner. I'm sorry, the leader, not just the owner. And we believe that there should be 7 different rater groups, starting with the ownership team, the board if they have one, managers and directors, peers, family and friends, and that data is contrasted with their self-evaluations. So now we see the gaps, and we define 50 behaviors that are critically important. One of the tools, I've done this now 20 or so times with various individuals and various teams. One of the tools that family businesses don't have is we don't know how to give professional performance feedback. They don't even do annual reviews much of the time and need to do so. This is an example of that. One of my clients does 2 or 3 every year with their senior leadership team so that they get in the practice or are reminded of how to provide professional feedback for one another. And it's both qualitative and quantitative, and then I provide the summaries.
Hmm.
It's phenomenal. Uh, in my opinion, there's nothing else like it. As you can tell, I'm an enthusiastic, creative,
Yeah.
innovative guy. And that led to a book, The Success Playbook for Next Gen Family Business Leaders, because people asked me to create it. And that led to the Next Gen peer groups, because a patriarch asked, Doug, would you take care of my boy? And we can talk about those some other time, I suppose.
Yeah, and family business has those issues that the corporate world has in a different form, and it is always tougher when it's someone that you have known for forever and care about, love, whatever the emotion. So let me finish by asking you, is there any question you wish I or others would ask you about yourself or what you do that doesn't get asked?
After writing so many books and doing so much consulting work for decades, what's missing? And my answer would be uh, psychological thrillers that describe the need for family business succession.
Okay.
And the reason I answered that is I just wrote a first draft for one, and it's being edited properly now. And it was triggered by a family trip when our kids and my wife were all reading psychological thrillers of various forms on a ski trip in Colorado in January. And I said, huh, what are you reading and why? Why is it interesting? Well, fiction describes reality better sometimes than reality. And I think there's opportunity for us to share some of those stories. So uh, we'll see if it's any good. We'll see if it's worth sharing. We'll see if people buy it and use it. But
Yeah, buy
we'll
it
see.
and use it, and if it really is good, they'll have a you'll have a Netflix flick series on it.
That's what one reviewer already told me. We'll see. Might need your help for that, John.
Okay.
I
Hey,
imagine
look,
you
Doug,
need.
it's been a pleasure. The time has flown by. Uh,
Yeah. Yes.
uh, this has been great. Insights on psychology and learning for family businesses and others. Doug can be reached at Action Learning. It's action-learning.com. And you also had mentioned JITcoach.com. Uh, I think anyone who listens to this and thinking, "Hey, I've got a problem with X, Y, or Z," and especially if it relates to the next generation of leadership, whether it's family or not, should be reading your books, talking to you, whatever it is. So I
Lots
thank
of
you
free
for being
information.
here.
Thank you, John, for the offer and the opportunity. There's lots of free information there, and I think that's critically important that we provide resources. So hopefully this is useful to others in some way.
Yeah, I'm a
Thank
big
you very
believer in that too. You give away lots so that you can show your expertise, and then they're going to want to work with you more.
with both of us.
Okay, thanks for being here, Doug.
My pleasure. Bye for now.